Good morning, everyone. I've been in the software engineering world, commercial software engineering world, for about 28 years. And a large number of those years were in startups, which means that you get to wear lots of hats. You get to wear the security hat, and you get to wear the infrastructure hat as well. At Prospa, in our current company, we're a 100% cloud-based organization. We were born in the cloud. We have no servers. We've never owned a server. A lot of the stuff is serverless. In my previous organization, I was responsible for building out the infrastructure across three global data centers, Shanghai, Sydney, and Atlanta, with probably about 250 servers, storage area networks. So I've lived in both worlds. Bit of a crazy talk title, so what's that all about? I'm a pilot when I'm not coding, and I found some similarities between flying under visual flight rules and flying in the cloud under instrument flight rules, and I guess cloud security. When you're flying under visual flight rules, when you start to fly, the most important thing that you can see is the horizon. And the horizon tells you whether you're going up or down or left or right. It gets the brain kind of orientated. And you can see threats. You can see mountains, and you can see planes, etc. When you move into an instrument flight kind of landscape, that's what happens. Things get exponentially more complex. The main thing that you lose is the horizon, but you really can't see the big obstacles like buildings and mountains that are in the way. Okay? What you have to rely on is a bunch of instruments. And in this case, you'll see in the middle there is something called an attitude indicator or an artificial horizon. And what that's trying to do is give you the same view outside of the cockpit as you have inside of the cockpit. Now, one of the challenges with flying with instruments is that when people are inexperienced at doing this, they start focusing on one particular input. And a classic example would be, the one on the right there's the altimeter. And if you're flying your plane and the plane is tilted this way and you're starting to slowly slide down, your altimeter starts to wind down. And we've all seen the movies, as that altimeter winds down, everyone starts to hone in on that. And what do you do? Pull up, pull up. So people pull up, and what that ends up doing is pulling the plane kind of upside down, and that's really unpleasant. What you need to do is have a constant scan and look at all of the inputs, particularly focusing on the main ones and then looking at the secondary inputs. And I think taking that kind of holistic view of cybersecurity is something similar. So I'm going to go through this talk. I've got a couple of challenges, which I want to give you what my 5 top challenges are around security, and then go through a bunch of tips that I think will help to address some of those challenges. Challenge number 1. We've all heard the saying, the perimeter is dead. I don't think that's true. I think the perimeter is changing. If you think of the old world, we had this concept of a network perimeter, right? All of the data and all the people were inside this trusted space, and outside of this network perimeter was untrusted. And as long as you could protect that perimeter, everything was good. In today's world, with all the cloud work that we're all building here, in the world of Slack and Trello, and you've got data everywhere, the perimeter changes into more of an identity perimeter. And the perimeter has to get a lot closer to the data you're protecting. It has to be a lot closer to the people that you're protecting. Which brings me to what I call the technology graveyard. So if the perimeter is changing, there's certain technologies that I think will actually be disappearing shortly. First one is the firewall. I honestly believe that within a few years, there will be no requirement for firewalls, because firewalls are designed to keep people out of a perimeter. Firewalls will change, the technology will change, but the traditional firewall, I think, will eventually disappear. And if the firewall disappears, so too do those things, the VPN tunnels. Okay, because what's a VPN tunnel? It's designed to tunnel securely through your firewall. And when you don't have that perimeter, what are you tunneling into? It makes no sense. So I think those technologies are pretty much ancient history soon. Challenge number 2, people. I promise this is a no statistics talk. If anyone's ever been to a cybersecurity talk, they will try and terrify you with statistics about X percentage of that and Y percentage of this. What I can say is that the majority of cyber attacks, the vast majority, are because of this. This is your Achilles heel, or because of your people. And why is this a cloud issue? This has always been the problem, right? It's a cloud issue because all the data is out there in the cloud, and when you compromise that person's credential, you've really, you've just made it that much easier for the kind of attacker to compromise the data. The most common form, obviously, of attacking the person is through social engineering, primarily phishing. I love all the different words. We've got phishing. Spear phishing, obviously, is when it's a targeted fish against a particular person. I love the concept of whaling, which is going after the big fish. Vishing is voice phishing, and I saw one in the office yesterday with smishing, which is an SMS phishing. And it kind of keeps going like that. The point is that no matter what you do, it just takes one person in your organization to be phished to potentially expose the entire company. So it's a major challenge. Challenge number 3 is old shadow IT. Once again, this has been around for a long time. I think it's more of a challenge now because what is shadow IT? Let's just define that. Shadow IT is unsanctioned applications, right? Applications being used by your employees that are not sanctioned. And there's a whole heap of things, technologies up here, some of which will be sanctioned, some of which won't be. Trello is a great one, right? It's a fantastic tool. People are using it. It's not signed up by the organization. And there's a lot of private information out there in Slack as well. So the reason this is a problem is now more than ever is the amount of SaaS applications that are out there and freemium signups. It's just that easy to actually roll this out. And it's pointless trying to prevent people using these apps because they're just going to use them. Once again, no statistics. A vast majority of people in your company will be using at least one unsanctioned application. Challenge number 4, where is my data? So when well, that's what most people think the cloud is, right? I know a lot of people in my company think that's what the cloud is. Where are my Google Photos? They're backed up in the cloud. Okay, that's where they are. I mean, everyone in this room knows that that's pretty much what the cloud is. And the thing is, when I ran those 3 data centers that I mentioned previously, I knew exactly on which spindles, on which drives my data was. I could go and grab a drive out and find that data. Today, we've got no idea. We might know it's in Sydney, but that's about it. So we just don't know where it is. And challenge number 5, in my opinion, is what I call third-party complacency. And that's where we rely too much on our cloud provider or our third-party partners for their security, right? So we're in AWS, we're in Azure, we're in Salesforce, and these guys have got every single certification under the sun. And people think back, oh, well, we're SOC compliant, we're PCI, everything's fine. But honestly, at the end of the day, I think you've all seen the shared responsibility model. So AWS has their one, Azure has their one, Salesforce has their one. And basically it goes like if you're on-prem, you're responsible for the security, everything is yours. As you move up the stack into infrastructure as a service, so the cloud provider kind of takes on some of that responsibility. I don't think infrastructure as a service is true cloud. It's kind of cheating. You want to really get beyond that and move up into kind of containers and PaaS and SaaS. And it doesn't really matter what the model is. I think, and you could argue where the ticks and crosses go. What's important is if you look across the top, ultimately we are responsible for our own data. We're responsible for governance. We're responsible for roles and responsibilities. So when you ask who's responsible, we all are. It's certainly nothing to do with the cloud providers. So quickly running through those challenges. Number 1, you've got your perimeter issue. Second of all, your Achilles heel, your people. Shadow IT, not knowing where your data is. And third-party complacency. So how do we deal with this stuff? Certain fundamentals. Number 1, who knows what that is? That's risk, right? Understanding what your risk profile is. That's Philip Petit, 1974, walking between the Twin Towers in New York. He clearly has a greater risk appetite than I do. But all of us in our businesses have different risk appetites, and those risk appetites change over time, right? As businesses mature, what was acceptable a year ago is no longer acceptable. So understanding what your risk appetite is fundamental. The crown jewels, right? Why do we care? Identifying what the crown jewels are. We care very much because of the following quote, which probably a number of you have seen as well, from a king of Prussia. He who defends everything defends nothing. Okay, so if you spread your defenses too thin, you're really not going to defend anything. So it's very important to understand what is your risk profile, what do you really care about, and then focus your efforts and your resources on that. So understand your risk appetite, identify your crown jewels, and apply proportional defense. Okay. So what I'm going to now do is go through a bunch of tips on what I think are the best ways to deal with some of these issues. And I'm going to have to go through them quite quickly, I'm afraid, because there's a lot of them. So I'll try and do them some justice. Step 1 is define an information security roadmap. This goes back to those kind of flight instrument controls, right? You have to take a holistic approach. You can't dive in on one particular area. You have to look at things far more holistically. So an information security framework and a roadmap. You might start off with an enterprise information security review. You'd go and get a reputable company to come in and do a review of your information posture. When that document is handed to you and your jaw hits the floor and you realize just how exposed you actually are, don't panic. At that point, you start working out, okay, what framework are we going to use to manage risk across the organization? And over what kind of time frame are we going to do this in? You're not going to be able to address those risks in a month or a year or even 5 years. You're going to have to put out a roadmap and a plan. Tip 2 is to get buy-in at the highest level. If your CEOs and your executive and your board are not bought in to the fact that security is important in your organization, you are doomed to fail. That is absolutely where you have to start, and you've got to focus on that. And the way we do that in our organization is going to be different and is going to depend very much on the culture of the organization. But you have to start there and you have to get the buy-in. And that can take time. You know, in my organization, I got a certain buy-in on year 1, and then year 2 got more buy-in, and by the time we were year 3, it was all guns blazing. Let's go. Here's a lot of money. Go and spend it. Start building out an information security management system, or an ISMS. So what's an ISMS? It's basically it's a set of policies and procedures that will allow you to keep business moving, business continuity, while minimizing your kind of risk exposure. Now you can do that independently, or what I would strongly recommend is you go and get an externally certified ISMS. Okay, so why would you do that? You get it externally certified because you've got enhanced governance, it increases your market reputation, it increases your general security posture. The one I would also strongly recommend is to go for ISO 27001. And there's one main reason for that. And that is because it takes a risk-based approach to security compliance. It's not prescriptive. So unlike PCI or some of these other ones where there's a whole lot of rules that you have to follow, ISO 27001 is risk-based. And all it says is you tell me what your risk appetite is. You write down how you're going to address those risks. And then all we're going to do is check that you do what you say you're going to do. You can say you're going to do anything. It's not prescriptive at all. Okay? But what it does is it forces you to write it down, to think about it. And because it's a recertification every year, it forces you to actually act upon what you say you're going to do. It forces continual improvement. One of the things that comes out of that, besides a whole lot of great policies and procedures, is a risk register. So when you first do that risk review, you'll come up with a whole lot of risks. And there might be hundreds of them, and you can continue to add to that risk register. What you then do is assess those risks against a matrix. And across the top, we have the likelihood of the risk occurring for every risk. And on the left-hand side, we have a risk impact. And you assess your risk impact based on a number of factors. They might be based on financial risk. They might be based on business interruption, reputation, etc. So a financial example would be, we're happy to lose, if we lose $5,000 or less, that's a low risk. If we lose $5 million or more, that's a high risk. Or for some organizations, that's a low risk. It just depends on the business. Business interruption might be we're not operating for an hour or a day or a week. Okay, reputation's an interesting one where you say, well, people found out about a breach. A high risk might be it made the national newspapers, and an extreme risk might be demand for government inquiry, for example. And there's certainly some of the banks going through that right now. Tip number 4, trust no one. I say that because there's just as much chance of your attack coming from within your organization or via your supply chain or third party than it is from an external source. Okay? So when you say trust no one, what does that mean? It just means that audit log everything and only provide access to the data that's required for that person's particular role. So if you're someone in sales, a sales agent doesn't necessarily need to have access to your entire customer base. A salesperson needs access to their customers and no others. That's an example of just really restricting the amount of access to just what people need to do their jobs. Following on from tip 2, which is at the top, create a cyber awareness culture across your whole organization. And this is more than just cybersecurity training, which you should be doing regularly. If you have an ISMS, it might state roll out cybersecurity awareness training on a regular basis to all users. It's posters around the office. It's creating an environment where security just becomes part of the way you operate. And the way I think you can do that is not to be an inhibitor. Security people need to be enablers of technology and enablers of business function. They should never be saying no to something. They'll be saying, yes, that sounds great. Let's work out how we can do that in a secure manner to help keep you safe and to help keep the business safe. And if you have that kind of collaborative way of working on these challenges, you'll find, and it takes time, that the business eventually starts coming to you proactively in the cybersecurity role, asking for how can you do this particular thing well. Run regular phishing simulations. There's some great tools out there that allow you to run phishing simulations across your organization. KnowBe4, PhishMe. These tools allow you to actually create simulated phishing attacks and attack your organization. They report back on who's kind of clicked the link, who's opened the email, who's clicked the link, and who's actually got and put in their username and password. The idea is not to name and shame, and part of that security culture is not to name and shame. What the tool will then do is it'll pop up, if someone does go and click a link, it'll pop up something and say, listen, this has been a phishing test by your organization. These are some of the tips that you should follow or ways to spot phishers in the future. And we've been running these for the last 18 months, and we can start to see the trends coming down as people are less and less likely to do that. Having said that, even with your security awareness training and your phishing simulations, and you've set up your email correctly with SPF and DKIM and DMARC and everything you've done to prevent phishing, there's always going to be at least one person who goes and clicks on that link and puts their username and password in. So how do you prevent that? You enable MFA everywhere. You have to turn on multi-factor authentication in every system you have, both at work and on your LinkedIn and on your Gmail, and it is really a phenomenal way to actually prevent those attacks. So when someone does give out their username and password inadvertently, you are still protected. Almost all of the tools that we use today have this out of the box. Just turn it on. Enable SSO everywhere. So why do we care about SSO everywhere? Primarily around offboarding. Okay, the biggest challenge here is we're all using 20, 30, 40, 50 systems with passwords. We've spoke about shadow IT. If you have SSO turned on everywhere, it's flicking a switch when you offboard someone and not forgetting about which systems you've forgotten to go and terminate users of. Marketing departments, I don't know why they're the worst. They seem to have 50 or 60 solutions that they use constantly and sign up for without telling anyone. Next-gen antivirus is phenomenal. For those of you that are not familiar with next-gen antivirus, this is antivirus technology that doesn't rely on signature databases. It is installed on your endpoints. It understands and sees what is the usual way of working. It looks at what's happening under your processes generally. And then what it does is it interrupts anything that's kind of abnormal. It understands what the malware is trying to do and blocks certain things. So without any signatures, incredibly fantastic technology. Roll that out. The other thing that some of these antivirus tools do, they do more than just antivirus. The tool that we use, it reports to us whether users are using shared passwords. So it can detect if two users are on the same machine with a different login name, which is kind of useful to know. It's constantly scanning the network and saying, I found 4 devices that don't have antivirus installed on them. And our one also does things like control our USB ports, which is my next port, which is lock down your USB. Okay? There really is no reason in today's world to have USB enabled. I know it sounds crazy. There's so much bandwidth available. There's so many ways to share files and documents. And once your data makes its way onto an offline medium like a USB, you really have no way to control it. So we've in our organization locked down all USB writing. We still allow reading, but you cannot write to USB. Remember I said firewalls are dead or dying? That's true except for these guys. These things are getting stronger and stronger. And amazing thing about web application firewalls, particularly cloud-based ones like Akamai or Cloudflare, they are so easy to turn on. You literally flick a switch. Okay, some of them are free. If you take a Cloudflare, you can install it for free. Absolutely phenomenal technology. Basically, all the vulnerabilities that we build into our software, the web application firewall generally will protect you against a lot of those, not all of them, obviously. Web application firewalls have the ability to inject security headers. They can prevent, if your hosts are running TLS 1.0, they will block all of those and upgrade everything to TLS 1.2 or 1.3. They act as reverse proxies and they hide your hosts behind DNS. So just amazing tools. Our WAF blocks 2,000 to 3,000 attacks a day. So turn it on, it's free, it's easy. This is my top tip. Not forgetting the fact that you have to take a holistic approach and you have to do everything, as I said, with the instruments, look at everything. This is an amazing bit of technology. For those of you that are not familiar, is everyone here not familiar with CASB? Hands up? Yep, okay, fantastic. So cloud access security brokers. This is a phenomenal piece of technology. Don't think of it in isolation, take it holistically. CASB tools, SkyHigh or Netscope are examples of these tools. They connect in via API into the back end of all of your cloud platforms. Okay, they connect into Gmail, into Salesforce, into O365, into Slack. And going in via the back end, they're actually able to analyze what behaviors people are doing within those cloud providers. Okay, this is one of the tools that takes you from being in that cloudy to having visibility. Absolutely incredible stuff. So they have APIs at the back end. They also can hook into your firewall logs and see what your firewalls are doing, so what your users are doing via firewalls. And the third thing that they do is you can deploy them with agents as well. And if you deploy them in that full mode with an agent, the agent is not only analyzing what's happening on the machine, it's correlating that with what's happening in the back end at the API. So what your CASB is going to tell you is Richard has downloaded a file from Office 365 that contained 4 violations of customer private information and has then used Gmail to send that document out. And it's going to alert you to that kind of stuff. This is the kind of visibility that you just did not have before. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. Have a look at it. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. It does a lot of other stuff as well. It can actually block some of those transfers, but in our case, we just use it to monitor and report and alert. Pen tests, you have to do pen tests. I know they're expensive. When you do your pen tests, I recommend, we use 3 or 4 different organizations to do pen tests. We do one that does our APIs, and then one that does our web applications, and one that hits up our kind of cloud infrastructure. And the next time we mix it up again. And what you get out of those is brilliant. You'll often find things. I've never had a pen test come back with, hey, everything's good. There's always something that will be fine. And sometimes they're very subtle. Sometimes it's something like your error messages are revealing too much about the fact that a username doesn't exist or does exist, because the error message reveals a bit too much in the way it's documented. And there's something called a cyber kill chain, which Lockheed Martin put together. One of the very first things at the cyber kill chain is reconnaissance. So gathering people's data, who are the users in the system, is something that you should kill straight away. So pen tests will pick up that kind of stuff. Secure code. I think a lot of people here have got engineering teams. It's pointless getting your engineers to write code without thinking about security, and then have all sorts of pen testing done after the fact. Take the time to have your engineers go through secure code training. There's also fantastic tools out there that gamify the whole thing. We run secure code tournaments. It's all really focused on, if the OWASP top 10, for those of you that are familiar with the top 10 security vulnerabilities that engineers continue to increase. For me, what's amazing here is 2013 to 2017, the same problems are still being put out there day after day after day. Okay? So by training your engineers on how to write secure code, you're probably going to stop a lot of your problems. The previous speaker spoke about code scanning as well. Same story. Just get your code scanned before it goes out there. And the next slide is a shout out to where's Erwin at the back? Thanks, Erwin. I shout out to Erwin because Erwin does a talk on this. He takes 30 minutes to talk about this slide. I'm going to try and do this slide justice in about 30 seconds, so apologies. It's 2018, you should have SSL turned on for everything. If you have anything that does not support SSL, you're really, really leaving yourself exposed, okay? All of these, web tokens, JWTs are all transferred, all your cookies are transferred, in the clear. You have to have SSL turned on. And there's some things that you can do that just give you a massive increase in your security posture. So security headers, there's 6 or 7 of them that you can just go and turn on virtually immediately. You've got to do some testing. Things like, HSTS, so strict transfer security, basically, which will tell the browser that even that first round trip should be done over SSL. It won't let the browser make a kind of HTTP request at all. Stops your website being iframed, that kind of stuff. And the same thing with cookies. Just adding a couple of attributes to the bottom of your cookies, make them secure, make them HTTP only. These things come for free and really increase the level of security against your applications. Third-party contracts is a big one. Supply chains are now, so as you know, you're spending your time working on how how well you're securing your organization. You've taken all these tips into account. People go, okay, that organization is really, really difficult to attack. I'm just going to attack its third parties. We know that they use, I don't know, Google AdWords, so let's hit Google AdWords and see if we can do something there and get it that way. So take the time when you're setting up your contracts to not only do your security due diligence against your suppliers, but also to bake security into those third-party contracts. I don't know if you know that next year there's something called modern slavery provisions are coming into force soon, which is where you're going to be forced to go and ensure that every supplier of yours conforms with modern slavery regulations, and they'll have to, which is a fantastic initiative. We should be doing something similar with security, right? Check your whole supply chain out. A lot of tips. This is the last one, I promise. I could keep going, but we'll stop here. Even with all of these things, there's unfortunately highly likely that at some point someone is going to get access to some of your data. Some person in the company is going to have an Excel file containing some data that they shouldn't and email it out. Okay, so what happens then? It's really important. That becomes an incredibly stressful time. And as part of your ISMS, you need to have a solid incident response plan in place. Your PR and communications teams need to have comms ready to go. It's going to be an incredibly stressful time. That stressful time could last for weeks or months. People are going to be freaked out. You need to think about sleep. You need to think about healthy eating. You need a real solid plan and to fall back on. So bear that in mind. Have that ready to go. If you do lose data, just a final point, remember there's a notifiable data breaches scheme that's been enforced in this country since February. If your turnover is over $3 million, you are obliged to not only tell the customers that you've lost their data, but to report to the government. And if you don't do that, there's about a $2.1 million fine for doing that. Okay. So, which brings us to this point. So as you sit in your cockpits of your aircraft, navigating your cloud landscape, hopefully one or two of these tips will take your view of your cloud landscape from that to that. Thank you very much.